All right, we're on.
All right, we're live. Okay, so
We're
this
doing it live.
is we're live and on the air. All right. So this is Eli Miles, Patrick Massey, and Arielle. Is it Korsgaard?
Vaughn. I changed my name to Vaughn.
Vaughn. Okay, that's right. And we are doing the Colloquy 1 for Jellicoe Road, Dizzy in Your Eyes, all that good stuff for this week. So, I guess what we're going to start off with for this discussion is just kind of have a conversation about young adult literature and what our expectations were kind of going into this book, how this book kind of maybe met our expectations, did meet our expectations, totally subverted our expectations, and we'll just kind of go from there into our deeper discussion on love. So I guess just go for it, guys. First, what do you think about the young adult literature going into it, and how did this book meet, subvert, twist your expectations, if it did?
I think, starting off going into this class, I think I always had kind of a pre-existing opinion about young adult lit and how it wasn't necessarily a valid art form, I guess, or something to be studied. I've always been a huge fan of Harry Potter and young adult lit in general, but I never really thought that it was something that was a valid study subject. It's something that we could actually go over in a college class. I actually always, I heard of college classes going over Harry Potter and Twilight and things like that, and I remember making fun of them because I thought, wow, that's really lame. Why aren't they reading the classics like I am? But I guess, reading this, it's so complex, and there are so many different levels and layers to the story, so much dimension that it's a lot more sophisticated than I thought it would be, I guess. So that's kind of changed my mind a little bit.
So to me, it was the complete opposite. Everyone's joking up here. Anyway, like I was saying, it was kind of opposite for me. It's like I already came in that. Oh, I'm getting some feedback here. So is anyone else?
Yeah, it kind of sounds a little choppy.
Yeah, like here and there.
I'm just going to keep on going. So what I was saying is I was completely opposite. It's like I always had that mindset that any sort of entertainment, whether it be like literature or movies, whatever, TV show, what have you, have something to give you. If whoever designed it to be that way, it's like it has something to give. I haven't found fair share of trash though, but it's like those who actually try to get something right in it, they usually succeed. And it can be the same with young adult literature too. It's like everything has its own story to tell, everything has its own thing to give. Just because it's designed for a certain type of audience doesn't mean that it's off limits for everyone else. So sometimes it's just adapting outside of your comfort zone. I think there was a quote by C.S. Lewis that saying that only the truly childish are afraid of trying childish things or something like that.
I like that. Yeah, I kind of agreed with Arielle kind of going into it, just about how I felt about young adult literature. Just I thought, oh, it's it's not really canon. It's not really classic literature, but you totally get some complex characters. You totally get some very very nuanced character development in there in some of these books. I mean, some of them, they're really for young adults, and they don't have much literary merit, but a lot of them do, and you can totally be in both baskets. You don't have to be in one or the other as far as like being good literature and being for teenagers. And I think there's a stigma, that you can't be in both baskets at once. And so, no, I totally got into Jellicoe Road, and I started reading it, and I was like, okay, this is definitely in both baskets at once. This isn't, just, young adult fluff, or one or the other. It's both. It's young adult and it's literature. And I guess that kind of brings us into kind of a larger discussion about just, how did this book kind of meet our expectations or subvert them? For me, it kind of really subverted my expectations because, like, what I expected was not what I got. You know, it has some very dark themes. It has some very adult, I guess if you want to use that word, adult themes in the book. Like, you know, this is very mature. They're dealing with very mature things. And I think a lot of times that we look at teenagers and we think they don't deal with the stuff that I deal with. You know, they're like, I'm so stressed, Bobby doesn't like me, but they still deal with very stressful things, and Taylor really does as well. So immediately that caught my attention. And then just the depth of character in the novel, just of Griggs, of Taylor, of the kids from the past, and how they all tied together. I thought it was very literary. It was very well done, and it didn't feel like it was trying too hard. I guess if that makes any sense, it didn't feel like she was really, you know, trying to be literary about it. It felt like natural. It felt like this is complex, but it's actually well done. It's effortless. So I was wondering what y'all thought about that.
Well, I do agree that some aspects in here, like the family connection things, well done, but it's not quite seamless to me.
Mm-hmm.
In some of the posts, how to me the whole story just shifts about halfway through. We come in about this war thing that's going on in the neighborhood in Jellicoe Road, but then it completely shifts over time over to, okay, we're focusing on Taylor's problems and Taylor's problems only. That's the only thing that matters at this point. So, but from the way that was introduced, it made it seem like, okay, this is how it's going to focus. Maybe like we'll learn how to get along here, kind of like go past the kind of click thing that seems to be going on here. But no, we never really get over that. I mean, they kind of interact with each other, but that click thing still remains to me about the end of it. It's just that it's just a lot of things that were introduced at the beginning of it just gets pushed out of everyone's mind until Taylor's personal problems are over. And by that point, it doesn't even matter anymore.
I think I guess I got caught up in the very beginning with the severity, the high stakes of the territory wars, and how it shifts, maybe not even halfway through, towards a different narrative, in my opinion, and it goes more towards the finding history, putting pieces together, and making the whole picture out of fragments. And then it turns out that the territory wars are only a game. And actually, I wrote a note about that, as the territory wars being kind of like a modeling of adult behavior and setting boundaries, and trying to set those boundaries and understand oneself and one's physical space and one's mental space. Yeah, that was kind of something that I don't know where I was going with that. That was really inarticulate.
No, I like that thought, because the territory wars, I like how you say the stakes change. Like, it's, we start off thinking the territory wars are high stakes, and then at the end we actually have real high stakes. We have life and death. We have finding out where she belongs in this this story, this timeline. And so the stakes change, and the territory wars really change in meaning. I think there was a post that I was kind of talking to, I think, to Ben about this, just how like a lot of things in the text kind of reverse their meaning. They reverse their intended purpose. Like the territory wars start out as like this, high stakes, like knockdown, drag out. This is us versus them, and then it turns into what it was intended to be. It was turned to be a game. The prayer tree was originally this Taylor views it as like a surveillance kind of thing, but it ends up being something more meaningful and significant to her. And so there's a lot of like these reversals of like what the intended purpose is.
Right.
And the stakes, like you said, the stakes change too. So no, I mean, that was something else I thought was very fascinating about the novel, just how the author kind of plays with us. She plays with what our expectations are and subverts them.
So,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that was kind of part of my problem, though, just because that it seems like to the moment where Taylor realizes the wars aren't really important, everyone else just seems to accept that. I mean, this is something that's kind of been ingrained for several of the kids' minds for years by now. It's like, just because it's not as important for one person, I wouldn't think that suddenly, oh, everyone else doesn't really care about it anymore either.
Right.
It's kind of like, in realistic terms, which is kind of how I've been thinking through this whole novel, since it's set in like a realistic setting. This doesn't follow through in my expectations on how it'd be. Like I said, just because one person has changed doesn't mean they're all affected in the same way. Especially since probably many of the people within the novel that are affected by these wars don't even know who Taylor really is. So it's just kind of problem that I've been facing throughout the whole entire novel, where my expectations of how reality will work isn't fitting within this literary narrative here.
No, that makes sense. And I mean, yeah, definitely. Just because Taylor's character has an arc that we can trace from beginning to end, sort of. It's kind of disjointed there at first, but we can kind of trace her development a little bit. We can't really get the same, clear picture because, I mean, obviously she's the one telling the story. We get a much clearer picture of her story than we do of Jonah or Saint Angelo or any of those other characters. So, I mean, that makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah, it's just, I was kind of expecting this whole breakout eventually from Taylor's character where, pretty much for the whole novel, she's kind of really self-centered about her own problems, doesn't care about how any of the other people are reacting. Like, Hannah's missing. How is that affecting the other girls at the home? So, who are suddenly having to do without this parental leader of sorts. And it goes on to saying, it's like, there are other people here that are suffering too. You just don't care or look at them. And I was just kind of expecting that throughout the whole entire time. It's like saying, okay, I need to pay more attention to the people in my life. But besides Jonah, I don't see her like really branching out.
Well, that kind of brings me to the thought that I had on familial love and the necessity that Taylor has to fill that gap before she can pursue a true romantic love with Griggs. And the necessity to have that love in the first place, that familial love to create one's own identity and memories and history so that you can actually move forward with creating your own identity.
Yeah. And that's an interesting point that, Dr. Nsinga really kind of alluded to it in her video of, dealing with incompleteness and dealing with just not being whole as a teenager. And we kind of read that in the supplementary materials, just how they're still forming their identities. They're still figuring out who they are. And that kind of means experimenting things with relationships, figuring out where these relationships fit. And she does that with her quote unquote family a lot. And I think that, well, one thing I just kind of stuck on was just her emotional intelligence and how that increases with her familial love and obviously romantic love with Jonah. Just how her emotional intelligence evolves throughout the story, and in a way that kind of is like, yeah, that's a teenager. It's not necessarily logical, but it's stuff that is the way a teenager would kind of make sense of things, like emotionally. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, definitely. I connected a couple of the poems from Pat Mora to that familial love concept and trying to fill in those blanks before you can really pursue your own identity, with another human being romantically. There was one that was Valentine to Poppy, and it's about the love this girl has with her father and, establishing that relationship. And there was another one. Oh, where was it? I wrote down the page number and now I can't find it. I swear. But I think it was called Kissing. And the father catches her kissing a boy and
right
boundaries and, feel like a part of a structured family unit and feel grounded in that before she can really move forward with her own identity and her own relationships.
Yeah, it's just like I get the feeling of that too. It's like I'm pretty sure I talked with this about Eli over the text a little bit. It's like Taylor's character seems her own identity is connected to her familial identity. The more she knows and learns about her own family, the more she improves as a person. It's just like she's gained her own identity through the roots of her own family. And you can also see that in Pat Moore's poetry too, how her identity is also connected to her family. Like there's a bilingual poem where she's talking to this person and can only speak Spanish. She's also part of that culture, but she's also part of the English culture. It's just like your identity closely ties in with your family. And I guess the reason why Taylor doesn't seem to have much of a personality going on is that during the early novel is that she's completely lacking that information. It's like she doesn't know how to respond because she doesn't have those roots to look back and lean on. I guess that seems like how it's presented to me.
I feel like I should mention I really love the multicultural approach to Pat Moore's poems.
Yeah.
I
Say
thought
that
that
again.
was really great.
Say that again. It sounds like there's a vacuum going on.
Sorry. I really appreciate the multicultural approach of Pat Moore's poems and the differing narrators and cultures represented and how that's so representative of youth today. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, definitely. And it also, I think this is a prompt, I think prompt number 3, but in the discussion forum, but they talk about Moore's poetry as how like going back and forth from different characters or different perspectives kind of helps the reader maybe kind of get an understanding of how the teens are kind of feeling their way out toward empathy.
Right.
You know, they're in that stage of let me kind of feel my way toward empathy and what emotional understanding means for other people. And one thing that just kind of struck me about Taylor specifically is just how she is at the beginning. She's so independent. She's so self-sufficient, quote unquote self-sufficient. She's so like dependent on just being independent.
Almost absorbed, yeah.
Yeah, and like I think of the On Guard poem by Pat Mora, how it's like I don't want to let anybody in, I don't want to let, I think the quote is, I don't want to let the garbage of the world touch me. Anything that is on me is alien. That really kind of resonates, I think, with Taylor's character because she doesn't trust the outside world at the beginning of the text, and she has to learn how to do that. And I think coming to terms with her family, that familial connection, really helps her to understand that and get over that.
Right.
Yeah.
I actually, when I read that one poem, I literally envisioned someone slamming the door in their parents' face, like,
Yeah.
get away. Yeah.
No one gets me.
Exactly.
Something like that.
And that's the thing. I mean, nobody gets me because they truly believe that. And I mean, we make fun of it because we have the benefit of hindsight. But I mean, like, I know when I was a teenager, I thought that. I'm sure all of us did. And reading that material is just about how, like, we always, teenagers, adolescents feel like they're on stage all the time, how they view like, oh, everybody's watching me, everybody's going to see me, and I'm going to expose myself for a fraud. Like, that is what Taylor feels at the beginning when she's like, I don't know what the position is, she's like the territory wars leader, I guess. So that's how she feels. She feels like, I'm going to get exposed, everybody's watching me. And when you're an adult, you have hindsight and you can look back and say, like, nobody cares about me as much as I think they do.
Yeah.
So
Yes, I had to learn from an early age on that no one can really truly get anyone else outside themselves because there's so much that we got hidden in each of us. Like we have our own past, secrets, what have you, our own experiences. Even if we try to share it with someone else, they won't fully understand the feelings and thoughts that go through us through those times and how it's shaped us as to who we are now. The only thing we do is kind of share it and hope they can understand, which is what Taylor doesn't seem to get. She'd rather just close everyone else off and let it stay that way. So the only person that she wants to get close to, of course, rejects her, Hannah, because of that stupid promise that don't even really make sense. But
and perhaps that was Hannah's point too in writing her manuscript, was she had kept people out for so long, and that was her safe place to keep secrets, and then she finally wanted to share that with Taylor to let her in.
Yeah, so many ways Hannah kind of resembles Taylor, just like the more adult version where this everything is happens but badly. It's like
Right.
it isn't until the end where Hannah also comes out of her own shell, where everything that she tried to keep hidden just finally comes out into light. Just like I said, keep trying to keep everything hidden for so long, it kind of pushes everyone else out too.
Right. And I think it's just miscommunication so much that causes so much of the turmoil in the text, like because they don't understand what the other people are thinking or feeling. Like you have that big fight that Jonah and Taylor have, and it's basically just because Taylor is basically hypothesizing or imagining whatever Jonah's feeling and vice versa. Like they're not actually talking about how they feel, they're just imagining how they think the other person feels, and when they finally spill their guts out, that's when the thing is resolved.
Yeah.
And it's sort of the same way with maybe her relationship with Hannah, how she is assuming what Hannah thinks about her or feels about her, maybe. But
And also
I guess we can
vice versa.
The concept of adolescence at that age being able to develop abstract thought and empathy, and so they're probably trying to work through that and actually make sense of what the other person is thinking, but they're jumping to conclusions because they don't quite have that concept down yet.
right.
They don't really know how to kind of express their own feelings. Taylor, especially considering that she doesn't have like any connections from the beginning of the novel. She's kind of learning it as she goes. And also probably from Jonah's point of view too, is that he can't really get his own emotions off either because of the just kind of the trauma of killing his father. So,
Right.
because that kind of alienates him from his own family, which leads to that night at the train station. He's kind of alienated his own self just because of the regret, and kind of prevents any new connections. That changes when he meets Taylor, someone that's kind of messed up in the same way he is, and that's basically their connection. They're both messed up. So, but in finding that connection, they both have someone that they can relate to, which kind of helps fix both of their problems. That this is someone that's gone through something similar to what I've experienced, and I can kind of lean on them, expect them to understand what I'm talking about. Like I said earlier, it's just like you can't expect everyone to know everything about you just from a glance here. You have to share something.
In with the notion in the developmental things that we were reading in the secondary text about the necessity to belong and to identify with someone and have that shared history.
Yeah.
Right. And that can only happen when you open yourself up to that vulnerability, to that, hey, I get to empathize with you. So, yeah, I think that kind of results in most of the conflict for the first part of the novel is just her getting over that hump, being vulnerable, opening up to somebody.
Right.
Yeah, completely. Yeah. That's it. it's always like the first steps are hardest in here. And from what I'm saying, so she has made no attempts to reach out besides Hannah for like the 5 years she's been staying at that place, which is why I found odd, honestly. It's like even if you don't closely relate to someone, if you live in the same space for several years, you kind of still like belong in that group. So that's like still comes kind of connection. At least that's the way I saw it. But it's just like it could also probably go to that part where we were saying it's like probably pushing people out. So that's just my hypothesis.
I mean, I agree. I think that teenagers usually, especially in Hannah Taylor's situation, want to project this identity. And I think the supplementary materials, I forget which one, I think it might have been the APA, they talk about like, you are at odds with um, basically the role that you're playing versus like what the burgeoning identity that you have actually is. And there's that friction there. And so Taylor has this role of, hey, I'm in charge of the territory wars. I got to be tough. I got to be a leader. I got to be a fierce warrior queen. And then there is the identity that she has, which is, what is my identity? I'm still searching for it. I still haven't found what I'm looking for. And so there's that friction there.
Yeah, kind of like peer expectations as it was going on about. It's like when you're part of a group that they expect you to act a certain part of the way, like, oh, we're part of the cheerleaders or we're part of the jocks or what have you. It's like when you're part of a group, you need to fit in some way, either behavioral or activity wise, some sort of connection. And when Taylor gets thrust into this leadership position, she figures she needs to act similarly to the leaders she's seen that in the past, which is that kind of tough persona that she's not or incapable of performing here.
That's very similar to the persona that Jonah had when we first see him.
Yeah.
And everyone's talking about, how he brutally killed his father, and there are all these, these rumors and this persona that he has about him. And I guess he feels like he has to live up to that almost.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, Jonah's character arc is very similar to Taylor's. I mean, obviously they're romantic interests, so their arcs kind of wind up in the same place, but they both kind of go through similar changes as well. I think that Jonah's just a fascinating character in general, just because of what we know about him is what Taylor knows. And so we kind of get to discover his journey along with Taylor while Taylor's narrating the book to us, and we kind of already get inside her head from page 1, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
True. Like I said, it's like they kind of have that connection. It's like you're messed up and so am I. That's how we relate. And it's just, they kind of provide that emotional support that each of them needs to just kind of overcome their own personal problems. Like by having someone Jonah cares about, he's able to kind of put his regrets behind him a bit because he needs to protect Taylor, even if it puts himself in danger. It's kind of that need to protect kind of overwhelms his own desire to like punish himself, like when he was at the train station.
Right. And I think that goes back to the scene with the prayer tree where Jonah has the paint roller and he's threatening to paint over all this stuff. He's exuding this air of like nonchalant, like, yeah, I'll paint over all this history and all this meaning to you because it's about the territory wars, and then we find out, oh, he's just painting water, or he's just putting water on it. And it shows that he actually views that there is something significant about the tree, maybe if not in his eyes, to Taylor's eyes. And that shows a deeper level of emotional growth in Jonah, that, hey, this is important, it's significant for some reason, if nothing else to Taylor. And so yeah, that he goes through a very interesting journey because we're viewing it through her eyes, and we kind of see, at first, this is a jerk. This is just a guy who's here to, have nothing but machismo and bravado, and he's nothing but hot air. But we kind of see him grow alongside Taylor as she's, revealing things about her past. And that's why I kind of think that Fitz is an interesting character, because he's kind of like the inverse of Jonah. Fitz kind of, we see Fit do what?
Sorry, I was getting on my dog.
Fitz, we see him grow, but we also see him deteriorate as well. And so it's kind of like a, up and down sort of thing with Fitz. And, obviously we kind of see his story grow through flashbacks, but I think Fitz is an interesting kind of inverse of Jonah, because he is the one who kind of forms these attachments, but at the same time lets those attachments, I guess, eat away at him, if that makes any sense, and it causes him to deteriorate.
But
I don't like that about Fitz. The deterioration of his mental state based on the loss and the chipping away of every single thing that he has in his life, and he's losing everything. It just makes him. I thought he was a really interesting character, actually. I would actually like to read more about his particular story and his mindset, I guess. Alas.
Yeah.
But to me, it's just a bit more cut and dry. It's like how Jonah was, like, he lets the ghost of his past continue to haunt him, which it's something that's traumatizing as that. It's killing someone very close to you. That is, of course, going to have some impact on your psyche. It's just sad that neither of them seemed to have gotten the help that they needed after such an event occurred. Just like, it doesn't seem like there's no like therapists or anything to help them get through what they're going for. Just saying everything's okay, it's not your fault. Sometimes those type of words just aren't enough.
No, definitely. And if we're going back to the idea of familial relationships and connections and how they how they matter to teenagers and how they kind of develop them and how they kind of matter in their development, Fitz is an interesting case because he kind of builds these sort of familial bonds with these 5 other people, and like it, because of the situation and what eventually happens, he pushes himself, I think, more than anything else after the event. He pushes himself away, and I think that kind of is what Jonah does at the beginning, but Jonah has this kind of revelation like, this is not what I should be doing. If that makes any sense.
I think it's just before that he's getting this new type of relationship, this connection with someone they didn't have before. Like I said, you're messed up and so am I. That's the type of thing that he sees. Like, you see someone going through something similar that he is, and he can't let someone else suffer more than they're doing like he is right now. He doesn't want someone else to share his fate. So I think that kind of ties into his line of reasoning.
I think if there's one takeaway from this book, it's that everybody's messed up.
Yeah, pretty much. So we kind of saw that in there too, just like everyone's little personal problems.
I have a funny quote that I underlined. Let me find it. It's hilarious. It's not hilarious. It's probably really terrible that I think it's hilarious. It's one of those.
Right.
Let's see. It's in the chapter 11, young adult lit brief history part. And it's talking about in the 18th century, children were still seen as deficient adults who needed all the help they could get. I thought that really wasn't.
Yeah, I didn't like that.
And if you think about it though, like a lot of this is, I mean, they're very dysfunctional human beings who are trying to figure out how to get to adulthood. So they, they're not. I don't know. I thought that's probably terrible, but I thought that was funny. So.
It's just, it doesn't seem so bad to those that already reached it. Like those who are still.
Exactly, of course. If I read that as an adolescent, I would think that's the most unfair thing in the entire world. So.
Yeah.
To me, I don't think that we give the younger people enough credit than they deserve. It's like they can do a lot more than what adults would expect them of it. Like growing up, my mom would always kind of treat me as an adult. If I had like an inquiry about anything, she would tell me straight up about what it was, unless it was like something like scarring. It's like, oh, they're eating the heart out or something like that. But it's like, so my parents would always give me the respect that they would give anyone else. Like it would be like a coworker or something like that. It's just like
right. I think it's definitely important to treat adolescents and children like they are actually human beings and not just accessories.
Yes, that's exactly what
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they are just figuring things out.
They are, yeah, definitely.
So I think we kind of confuse dysfunction or we kind of confuse them experimenting in logic, basically arguing every single day about everything. They're experimenting in relationships and emotional intelligence. We just confuse that for dysfunction, I think, a lot of times. And in a lot of ways it is, because they haven't figured it out yet. They don't have their wheels in a groove, but they're getting there. They're kind of figuring out where the grooves are. And I mean, as adults, like I said, we have the benefit of hindsight, and we can, look back on it now and sip our tea and say, "Oh, those teenagers."
Don't know about y'all.
So, I think it's easy to say that all these people are messed up, but it's also, I think, how many people are messed up, but they aren't showing it, and how are these people coping with the fact that they're messed up? Do they recognize they're messed up? Are they recognizing that they're messed up and doing something to help with it? Is it helpful what they're trying to do to cope with it, or is it unhelpful? I think there's a lot of different nuances, and a lot of these characters kind of fall into those different boxes.
Right. I was going to kind of make the parallel too. It's kind of like having, a baby or a toddler, and they're trying to physically figure out what's going on with them. They're trying to get their bearings. And when you have an adolescent, they're emotionally trying to get their bearings. And no, they don't cry, they don't scream, they don't throw fits, but how are they coping with it? They have different mechanisms of coping than a young child would, or adults do.
Some of them do throw fits, though.
That's true.
Yes. It really just changes from person to person. No person is like the other. They all have their different ways of doing things, either from their relations or just how they believe that they are supposed to handle things. So some can't even handle it. Like I consider Taylor's running away as kind of like a developmental flaw in the story. It's like the author isn't letting the character grow and letting us see the true character behind Taylor by having her run away from all these problems by refusing to face them. But then I kind of realized, no, that is kind of a character choice here. It's like some people, when they're overwhelmed, they try to get away from it. They run away from their problems. And I just didn't think about it like that because I'm just so used to it's like, okay, I need to step on the plate here and do what I can. So that's kind of a revelation for me.
And so I guess at the end, considering how everything unfolds, she finds her mom dies. She's there for the whole ending. I guess, what do you guys think that she finds? What do you think that at the end, the book's this whole quest for meaning, and like Dr. Nsinga said, it's this whole quest for starting the puzzle with the middle and then building its way out. What do you think that she finds at the end, after finally figuring out who her mother was, who the brigadier was? What is this unifying sense of purpose that she happens to come across, or does she come across any sort of purpose or meaning after all that?
I think she comes across a sense of belonging, finally. I think there was always a major question of where she belonged, who she belonged to, and her connection with Hannah. She knew that she belonged with Hannah, but she didn't quite know how it was. She didn't really know how to define that at first. So I think she gains this sense of family in kind of a convoluted way, and a sense finally of belonging in a family unit.
Hmm.
If that makes any sense.
No,
Yeah.
it makes total sense.
So I agree with that too. Just like by finding her family connection, she's able to come up to terms with her own identity. That she's like no longer this figure just floating around. She has these roots deeply cut in the ground that she can use to develop her own life, her own way of thinking. Because now she knows where she comes from and the people before, how they reacted, how they got to their points of lives. To me, like I said, it's like her knowledge about her family kind of leads to the development of her own personality. She becomes more capable the closer to figuring out the mystery she is.
Definitely.
Yeah, so it's like it kind of goes on to like what the adolescent psychology article said, and it's like how uh, teenagers need a strong sense of family, like an ethnicity and stuff like that. They need to know what they're a part of in order to help them develop. And I think that help is exactly what that does for Taylor.
Yeah, one thing that kind of remained with me after reading it was just the how she kind of has this refrain, and life goes on, and life goes on, and these little vignettes, these little slices of life that keep popping up, and she keeps, beginning them with "and life goes on," and it seems like she's kind of figured out that her trying to, you know, put her hands in the mud and control her life isn't necessarily the way to do it, but to kind of like just say, this is my life. I think I've finally figured out where I fit in, like, like you guys said. And so now that I have that understanding, I can kind of deal with life much better than I used to.
Right, definitely. I feel like she no longer has any reason to run or to go seek other things. I feel like she has, everything she needs right there.
Yeah, it's like the difference between a trip and a journey.
Right.
Trip is like you're going somewhere and not going to stay long. And journey is that you grow as you go. You get new experiences. That's the way I thought. That's exactly what it is. The whole journey. The whole trip was a journey for Taylor.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting too if you just think about it. Like, okay, this is all important information. She has a sense of family. She has a sense of belonging because she now knows all this stuff about her family, where she comes from, where she fits in. Yet, a lot of stuff, that happened can be stuff that is pretty, detrimental to a young child's development if they know that stuff, very young, I feel like. So I feel like there's a bit of a balance that needs to be kind of figured out. Like, if you are in Taylor's position, I don't know if you necessarily need to have all of that information dumped on you at an early age. Does that make any sense?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
And I'm actually surprised that she coped as well as she did with the hermit. And that
Oh,
whole
yeah.
that was surprising to me.
But there's also, it's like you can't give them nothing. That's how Taylor was as well. It's like all these things are happening around her that involves her as well, but she has no idea of it. And the thing is, she knows that everyone else knows. That's just the ringer for her. Is like she needs a part of it. It's like she can't be kept in the dark just because she's a child. It's like it involves her life.
Right.
It's like, I mean, maybe not the whole dark truth, like your mom was a drug dealer and she lost you, so we had to get you. And it's like your mom was in a very bad place and she couldn't quite keep care of you, something like that, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's a very common feeling for a teenager too. Is just the feeling that everybody's in on a secret and you're the only one not in on it.
Yeah.
And for Taylor, it's a very big, important secret. And I think that's the very frustrating thing for her. It's just like, how am I the only one who doesn't know the secret, who doesn't know what's going on? And because it's about me. And so I think that kind of also resonates with a lot of teenagers, just the fact that, I always feel like adults or maybe even my peers have the secret knowledge that I'm not a part of.
Right. Well, and also as a caretaker, coming from Hannah's point of view, at what point is it appropriate to share such a heavy history with an adolescent or a child? At what point is that okay? Can they handle it,
Right.
Often it kind of depends on the situation and the child.
Right.
There's no clear-cut answer for everything. It's like I have to say, parenting is this experimental thing. You find out as you go along. There's
Amen.
going to be some mistakes, but you have to make them.
100%.
I guess that kind of closes the circle a little bit. You as a teen, you try to figure out things as you go, and when you have kids, you do the same thing over again. So
That's very true.
All right.
All right.
y'all got any other deep thoughts?
I covered a lot of my notes, actually.
Sweet.
I think we got it. Just like that's pretty much everything that we need to cover.
All right. Well, I think that's it. Well, thank you guys for hanging out on the Google Hangout. And I guess, Dr. Nsinga, this is Eli, Arielle, and Patrick signing off.
Yeah.